All right, good evening, afternoon, or good morning, students. This is Mr. Martyrone coming to you. We're continuing our study of World War I, our introduction to World War I, and we are on question number 17 of our note packet. So if you want to take a look, we're going to talk about the effects of Russia withdrawing from the war. That's right, Russia withdrawals. Russia, guys, is a loser in World War I. Even though they were part of the Allied forces, even though they were allied with the French and the British, who end up winning, we know, World War I, Russia is not successful. So what happens is this. The Tsar was overthrown, and he was replaced with a guy by the name of Vladimir Lenin. Now, why this is important is that Lenin was a communist. This will now give rise to Russian communism, that leftist movement taking place in Russia. So the Tsar is overthrown, Vladimir Lenin takes over, and ultimately Russia will sign a peace treaty with Germany in 1918, and therefore they withdraw from the war. Now, what's really interesting, and we're going to talk a little bit about this in class, is that Vladimir Lenin was freed. He was actually a German prisoner, and Germany actually shipped him back to Russia with the hope. Their secret plan was, well, Lenin, when he gets back to Russia, will be so mad that this war is going on, he'll stage a coup, overthrow the government, and withdraw from the war. And that's exactly what Lenin does. The big consequence of this, ladies and gentlemen, is that Germany now can focus on the Western Front. And if you guys remember, Germany is fighting a two-front war at this point in the war. They're fighting on the east, they're fighting Russia, and then the west, they're fighting France, Belgium, and Great Britain. So this marks a turning point, kind of the low point of the war for the Allies. All right. Now we're going to turn our attention to the war on the high seas, submarine warfare. And if you're following along on our notes, this is question number 18. The Germans used the new technology. They used something called Unterseeboats, or U-boats, to blockade England from gaining resources and materials. This blockade is effective. The Germans originally, they target only warships, what's called restricted or conditional submarine warfare. But what ends up happening is the Germans use these undersea boats to torpedo civilian ships. One of those civilian ships happens to be the Lusitania. And on May 7th, 1915, the Germans sunk the Lusitania. Now, rightly so, they suspected that the Lusitania was carrying arms and munitions to Great Britain. And in fact, it turns out that the Lusitania was in fact carrying arms and munitions. They were disguising this in a civilian ship, so it was a kind of a clever ploy by the British. The Germans restrict their submarine warfare until 1916. They say, we will not target civilian ships. But then in 1916, they resume targeting civilian ships. And there is a drawing of the Lusitania as it is torpedoed. It's struck by one torpedo and then very quickly begins to sink. It will then explode and sink very quickly, where it kind of flops over on its side. And ultimately, to this day, it rests on the bottom of the Atlantic floor. Now, what's very interesting about the Lusitania is that towards the end of the 20th century, submersibles and divers would go and explore the wreck of the Lusitania. And in fact, it is discovered that, in fact, the Lusitania had had ammunitions and weapons on board. And the Germans were somewhat right in targeting the Lusitania, even though this was a great travesty to many Americans and British. And here you have, ladies and gentlemen, here is the New York Times. The Lusitania sunk by a submarine. Roughly 1,200 civilians were killed. And this kind of triggers American outcry for the war. All right. This takes us now to question number 19. How does America get in the war, you ask? Well, the United States stays neutral for as long as possible. But what happens is eventually the United States intercepts, or the British intercept, something called the Zimmermann Note. And the Zimmermann Note was nothing more than a coded telegram from Germany to Mexico. And very simply, that Germany said, listen, we will help you, Mexico, invade the United States and reclaim territory that you lost in the Spanish-American War. Easy enough. Once word of this secret message got out, Americans were outraged because remember, at this point in the war, America was neutral. Yeah, we had some casualties in the Lusitania in 1917, but we really didn't have any skin in World War I, so it wasn't that important to us. We were very isolationist. But now we see that Germany is in fact trying to get involved and disrupt our way of life. And the whole idea was with this strategy was if Mexico could fight the United States and keep the United States occupied in North America, they wouldn't get involved in the conflict in Europe. And it is somewhat ironic because the United States at this point really didn't have any interest in the European conflict. And this is the point where Americans will get involved, and I'm going to talk about that in the next video. So if I went too fast, play the video again, but make sure you get the notes. This is questions. We did 17, 18, and 19 in your notes.